Frostbite does not begin with pain. It begins with an insidious, creeping numbness that tricks the mind into believing the worst is over. At -71 degrees Celsius, the Siberian air ceases to be a weather condition and becomes an apex predator. Breathing it directly can cause lungs to hemorrhage. Exposed skin freezes solid in under 60 seconds. Camilla Foster knew these facts intimately. Stationed at Outpost 42, a heavily insulated geodesic cabin hundreds of miles from civilization near the Kolyma Highway, she had spent the last 4 months cataloging deep ice core samples for Dr. Gregory Hayes at the University of Washington. The isolation was absolute. Her only connection to the outside world was a high-frequency satellite radio connecting her to Jonathan Finch, a logistics operator stationed in Yakutsk. Snow lashed against the reinforced triple-pane glass of the cabin, sounding like handfuls of gravel thrown by a giant. Camilla was boiling water on the propane stove when she heard it. It was a faint, rhythmic scratching. At first, she dismissed it as ice fracturing off the roof, but the rhythm was too deliberate. Scratch. Pause. Grabbing a heavy flashlight and a crowbar, Camilla approached the primary airlock door. She unsealed the heavy steel latches. The wind ripped the outer door from her grip, slamming it against the exterior wall with a deafening crack. A cloud of blinding white snow swirled into the entryway, bringing with it a man. He collapsed face first onto the grated floor. He was a mountain of ice and synthetic fabric, his parka shredded and burned along the left side. Camilla hauled him inside by the collar of his coat, fighting the sheer weight of his frozen body and the howling vacuum of the storm. She managed to slam the door shut, sealing the deadbolt. The sudden silence in the cabin was jarring, broken only by the man's shallow, wet breathing. "Hey, can you hear me?" she shouted, rolling him onto his back. His face was a horrific mask of white and purple. Ice crusted his eyelashes and beard. His lips were a terrifying shade of blue. Without hesitating, Camilla dragged him toward the cast-iron stove in the center of the room. Survival protocol dictated immediate but gradual rewarming to prevent cardiac arrest from thermal shock. She pulled off her own heavy gloves and grabbed a pair of trauma shears from her medical kit, ruthlessly cutting away his ruined parka and multiple layers of frozen fleece. When she reached his base layer, she noticed something strange. A heavy, cylindrical object wrapped in a scorched piece of leather, strapped securely to his chest with duct tape. She set it aside, focusing on his survival. For 6 agonizing hours, Camilla battled death on the cabin floor. She submerged his hands and feet in basins of warm, not hot water. She packed his core with heated blankets. Around 3 a.m., the man's core temperature finally rose enough for him to regain semi-consciousness. He thrashed weakly, his eyes rolling back. "Kevin," he mumbled, his voice a raspy whisper grating like sandpaper. "Kevin." The drive. "Don't let it burn." "You're safe," Camilla said softly, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You're in Outpost 42? I'm Camilla. What is your name?" "Daniel," he gasped, his eyes darting around the small, brightly lit room before fluttering shut again. Daniel Miller. By morning, the storm had intensified, rendering any rescue flight impossible. Camilla sat at the radio console, holding the receiver. Static hissed aggressively. "Jonathan, do you copy?" "This is Outpost 42, she repeated for the 5th time. A heavily distorted voice broke through the static. "Camilla, read you. Bear. No choppers for at least 48 hours. Repeat, 48. I have a survivor," Camilla transmitted. "Male. Severe frostbite. Signs of blunt force trauma. He needs a medevac as soon as the sky clears. Understood. Stay put. Keep him alive." The radio went dead. Camilla turned around. Daniel was awake, propped up against the wall on a pile of sleeping bags. The color had returned to his face, though his fingers were heavily bandaged. He watched her with a guarded, calculating expression that seemed entirely out of place for a man who had nearly frozen to death hours prior. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice stronger now. "You saved my life." "You shouldn't be alive," Camilla replied, handing him a steaming mug of beef broth. "What happened out there?" "The nearest settlement is 300 miles away. Daniel wrapped his bandaged hands around the mug, savoring the warmth. "I'm a wildlife surveyor," he said smoothly. "Contracted by an environmental group out of Seattle. I was tracking caribou migration routes when my snowmobile threw a tread and caught fire. I walked for 2 days." Camilla nodded slowly, her expression sympathetic. "That sounds terrifying. You're lucky you stumbled upon my cabin." She turned back to the stove, her mind racing. A snowmobile fire would explain the burns on his coat, but it wouldn't explain why he had smelled distinctly of aviation fuel when she pulled him inside. It wouldn't explain the bruising pattern across his chest, which looked exactly like the imprint of a high-speed aircraft harness. And it certainly didn't explain the titanium cylinder she had hidden in her tool chest while he slept. Later that afternoon, while Daniel fell into an exhausted sleep, Camilla retrieved the cylinder. It was heavy, sealed with a biometric thumbprint lock, but the leather wrapping around it was actually a partially melted wallet. Inside, she had found a charred corporate identification card. It didn't belong to Daniel Miller. The badge read, "Kevin Penhaligon, Senior Auditor, Bearing Consolidated." The pieces clicked together in Camilla's mind with terrifying clarity. Bearing Consolidated was a massive, notoriously ruthless mining conglomerate operating in the deep Siberian tundra. If Daniel was carrying Kevin's badge and Kevin's locked drive and murmuring about a fire, the reality of the situation was far darker than a broken snowmobile. The tension in the cabin grew suffocating over the next 24 hours. Outside, the wind screamed, trapping them in a claustrophobic box of wood and metal. Camilla played the role of the caring nurse perfectly, checking Daniel's vitals and feeding him warm soup, but she noticed his eyes constantly scanning the room, lingering on her tool chest, searching for the heavy metal cylinder he thought was still strapped to his chest. On the evening of the second day, the storm finally began to break. The howling wind subsided into a low moan. Camilla was at the radio, pretending to check the frequency, when she saw Daniel's reflection in the glass window. He was out of his sleeping bag. He was moving silently, favoring his injured left leg, and in his hand, he gripped the heavy iron fire poker from the stove. Camilla didn't turn around. She kept her voice perfectly level. "The storm is clearing. Jonathan just signaled. A chopper will be here by dawn." "That's good news, Camilla," Daniel said. His voice was no longer that of a grateful survivor. It was cold, hard, and utterly devoid of emotion. "But I won't be taking that chopper." Camilla slowly turned around. Daniel was standing 6 feet away, the iron poker raised. His eyes were dead. "Where is it?" Daniel demanded. "Where is what?" Camilla asked, backing up against the radio console, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. "Don't play stupid with me," Daniel snarled, taking a step forward. "The titanium drive. I know you stripped my gear. I know you found it. Hand it over, and I might leave you with enough supplies to survive until your rescue arrives. Lie to me, and I'll cave your skull in and tear this cabin apart myself. You're not a surveyor," Camilla whispered, her voice trembling. "Who was Kevin?" Daniel let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Kevin was a corporate suit who couldn't look the other way. He found out I was siphoning off coordinates for unregistered rare earth mineral veins and selling them to a rival firm. He had the proof on that drive. He was flying back to Seattle to ruin me." "So you killed him," Camilla said. "I didn't have a choice." Daniel snapped, his knuckles white around the iron bar. "I was on his charter flight. I rigged the fuel line. When the plane went down in the tundra, Kevin didn't survive the impact. I took the drive, set the fuselage on fire to cover my tracks, and started walking. Now, give me the drive, Camilla. I'm taking your snowcat parked out back." Camilla looked terrified. She raised her hands in surrender. Okay. Please don't hurt me. It's in the red toolbox under the cot." Daniel sneered, keeping his eyes fixed on her as he backed toward the cot. He kicked the toolbox open and spotted the silver cylinder resting among the wrenches. He snatched it up, a triumphant grin spreading across his bruised face. "You've been very hospitable, Camilla," Daniel said, moving toward the heavy winter gear hanging by the door. "It's a shame your rescue chopper is going to find you tied to that stove." "Daniel, wait," Camilla said. Her voice had changed. The trembling was gone. Daniel paused, his hand on the zipper of a spare parka. He looked back at her. Camilla walked calmly over to the small table and picked up the thermos of tea she had poured for him 5 minutes prior. Before you go into -40 degrees, you should really finish your tea. The cold is unforgiving. Daniel laughed mockingly. You think I'm going to stand here and drink tea with you? I think, Camilla said, her posture straightening, her tone suddenly commanding and chillingly authoritative, that you already drank half of it. While I was checking the radio, Daniel frowned. He looked down at the mug resting on the counter. It was half empty. A sudden, cold dread began to pool in his stomach, far worse than the Siberian frost. What did you do? He demanded, taking a step toward her. But as he did, his left leg buckled. He caught himself against the wall, his vision suddenly swimming. The fire poker clattered to the wooden floor. You told me a very interesting story, Daniel, Camilla said, stepping over the iron poker and walking toward him. She wasn't holding a weapon. She didn't need one, but you missed a critical detail. Did you really think Bering Consolidated would just lose contact with a senior auditor's plane and assume it was bad weather? Daniel's breathing grew shallow. His heart pounded wildly in his chest, but his limbs felt like lead. He slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor. Who are you? He slurred. You thought Dr. Gregory Hayes was a professor at the University of Washington, Camilla said, crouching down beside him. She reached into his pocket and casually retrieved the titanium drive. Gregory Hayes is the Director of Global Intelligence for Bering Consolidated, and I don't study ice cores. Daniel's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror as the realization washed over him. He hadn't stumbled upon a random researcher's cabin. By the grace of God, when Kevin's plane went off radar, our satellite thermal imaging picked up the wreckage burning, Camilla explained, her voice as smooth and cold as the ice outside. We also tracked a single heat signature moving away from the crash site, moving exactly in the direction of this outpost. I didn't rescue you, Daniel. I was waiting for you. The radio, Daniel gasped, his eyelids drooping violently as the heavy paralytic sedative took full effect. Jonathan isn't sending a medical chopper, Camilla said, standing up and looking down at the paralyzed, terrified man at her feet. She walked over to the radio, picked up the microphone, and flipped the frequency dial to an encrypted channel. Outpost 42 to command, Camilla said clearly. Command reads you. Camilla, a crisp, professional voice, replied, not the static-filled fake transmission from earlier. The package is secured. Kevin's drive is intact. The saboteur confessed and is currently subdued. Weather is clear for extraction. Copy that. Outpost 42. A corporate retrieval team will be on site in 20 minutes. Excellent work. Camilla set the microphone down. She walked over to the window, watching the first light of dawn break over the endless, frozen white wasteland. Behind her, Daniel Miller lay completely paralyzed, unable to move or speak, trapped in his own body. He had survived a plane crash. He had survived a 50-mile trek through -71-degree cold. He thought he had beaten the wild, and he thought he had manipulated a helpless woman to secure his fortune. But as the distant, rhythmic thud of heavy corporate military helicopters began to echo over the silent Siberian tundra, Daniel realized the terrifying truth. The wild hadn't spared him. It had simply herded him directly into the slaughterhouse.